Here at the Bantu Sun, we came up with a list of 6 countries that we believe are the challengers to the current world order, established post-World War II. We call this list the CRIIPT 6: China, Russia, India, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. If you have not had a chance to see the video in which we go into the reasons we've done so, please do. In this video, I want to discuss some of that decision process, how we decided on these 6 countries and some countries that came close and why they didn't make the cut. So in developing this content, we really wanted to provide a list that was applicable. Our mission statement revolves around actionable insight. This immediately shrinks the time horizon. We're looking for important players in the next 20 to 30 years. So if we come across a country with a great story, which usually centers around demographics, economics, culture, and natural resources, but it's not really coming together until the second half of the century, we shied away from those countries. For example, I'm a big fan of Mozambique potential. I think it's an extension of the South African acumen. Maputo to Johannesburg is less than a distance of Boston to Baltimore. South Africa is arguably the most advanced economic and skilled country in Africa, making it attractive for a nearby source of capital investment. This, along with favorable demographics, access to the fertile Zambezi River Basin, access to the Zambia-Congo Copper Belt, with an indigenous abundance of resources such as coal and gas, makes Mozambique a hidden gem in my eyes. But the cultural and trade connections aren't there. As a former Portuguese colony, its major religion is Roman Catholic, but it's having trouble fighting off the Islamic group Al-Shabaab, seeking military aid from tiny Rwanda, a country 1/30 of its size. Mozambique is just a mess. I'm a big fan of its potential, but there are too many immediate challenges that need to be addressed for them to be in serious consideration. So that's the time aspect. For other considerations, I look at the past, how powers rise and fall, and how I'm seeing that pattern replicated. I'm looking for 3 specific aspects of varying degrees. Number 1 being demographics. If a country is not over 100 million people, it was hard for me to take them serious in our list. For example, we have Turkey and Iran, both under 100 million people, but they have favorable demographic trends and other strong points. But I am mostly looking for countries that can meet this benchmark. I think the UK surpassed the Dutch due to demographic scale, and that the US surpassed the United Kingdom due to demographic scale. I also believe Germany and Japan were unable to conquer the Soviet Union and China respectively in World War II due to their demographic scale. Basically, when quality is roughly on par, quantity gets denied. Secondly, I'm looking for market influence. Basically, how competitive is that country in the marketplace? Are citizens of that country buying up businesses in surrounding countries, or are surrounding countries buying their businesses up? A great example would be the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE are FDI machines. They go around with their massive sovereign wealth funds making major investments, but their countries are very small demographically, 50 million people max, all summed up. This removes them from the running in my book. Another aspect of this line of thought is that when these groups travel, how likely are they to dominate the marketplace? India and China are great examples of this. China throughout Southeast Asia and India throughout the British Commonwealth states. Both of these groups have been able to commercially surpass domestic populations of their newly adopted homes. Amy Chua references them as dominant minorities in her book World on Fire, which I have not read, but I have read Thomas Sowell's Cultures and Conquest, which references these groups as middlemen. The logic behind this is commercially successful cultures dominate the marketplace. They become capital rich and use these resources to influence state action. These groups are also able to impose their culture more easily, as groups outside the network will look to acquire more aspects of their culture to get greater access to the successful group's resources. A good example of this would be the Muslim influence extending from Morocco to Indonesia. Many groups converted to Islam out of faith, but some to gain commercial access that would otherwise have been denied. In many countries, especially Southeast Asia, Islam was not spread by the sword, but by the merchant. Lastly, I look at geographic scaling capacity. Is there room for growth? As a country becomes stronger, it will assert or even expand its borders. It will need to establish buffer regions. China is a great example of this. The bulk of its population is centered in the eastern portions of the country, while its northern and western territories of Xinjiang, Tibet, Qinghai, and Inner Mongolia makes up 50% of its territory, but only contains 4% of its population. All powerful countries seek a buffer, preferably within their territorial control. When I see countries such as Indonesia and Bangladesh, I see strong demographics and commercial acumen. But Indonesia is an archipelago, which impedes the synergies of geographical scaling, and Bangladesh is smothered under a massive India. Now, there are two countries that hit these three marks specified prior that I want to touch on: Brazil and Nigeria. These are countries that barely missed the list. Brazil is a southern colossus, in contrast to the northern colossus of the Americas, the United States. Brazil is massive and is the world's 5th largest country. With the exception of Ecuador and Chile, Brazil touches every country in South America. It has access to major resources, no significant threat for a neighbor, and a population of over 200 million people, with the 13th largest stock exchange in the world. Yet, Brazil is relatively stagnant, with one of the worst economic growth rates in South America over the last decade. Nor has it been able to take leadership and create any great organizations for advancement amongst its American neighbors. I think that the stars will align in Brazil's future, but currently, in the words of Israeli spokesman Yigal Palmore, Brazil is an economic and cultural giant that remains a diplomatic dwarf. Nigeria is another country that shows great promise. By the end of the century, its population is expected to be larger than the United States. The industriousness and ingenuity of its population is known throughout the world, with some of the highest performing American immigrants being Nigerian. Cultural mainstays such as Afrobeats and Nollywood are ubiquitous. But currently, Nigeria lacks cohesion and efficacy. For instance, Nigeria is a top 10 global crude oil producer, but it is also a top 10 importer of refined petroleum products, meaning Nigeria produces and sells a cheap version of a product to only import a more expensive, ready-to-use version of the same product that they just sold. Their economic model is counterproductive. This completely erodes any benefit of Nigerian oil production. Couple this with the fact that Boko Haram has been running amok around the Lake Chad region of the country. This calls into place the territorial integrity of the country. Any rising power has to be able to extend its authority throughout the entire sovereignty of its state. So what are your thoughts? You think we hit the nail on the head with our selection process? Or do you think we left some major players off the list? Comment below. Take care. Bantu up.